Wayne is a former peace officer and security professional with a background in criminal justice and law enforcement studies. He is a student of geopolitics and the New World Order agenda, as well as a seasoned activist and organizer on numerous issues. He is the co-founder of the first Canadian 9/11 Truth Group, as well as the organizer of the rather successful Vancouver 9/11 Truth Conference entitled 9/11 Canada and the New World Order. That was in June of 2007. In 2009, however, as the story regarding the swine flu outbreak in Mexico began to circulate, he noted a number of inconsistencies in the story and recognized quickly that it bore all the hallmarks of a false flag operation, a PsyOp. He quickly began to refer to H1N1 as the false flag flu, subsequently launching the website falseflagflu.com. This has since become his primary focus, and he is now a leading activist worldwide with the vaccine resistance movement. Further topics of this presentation will likely include mandatory vaccinations as a threat, as well as the controversial Bill C6. So with that, I would like to welcome Wayne Prante.
So I'm going to read you your Miranda rights here. For anybody who may disagree with anything I have to say today or doesn't like what I have to say, read that. I'm Canadian. Free to speak without fear, free to worship in my own way, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe is wrong, free to choose those who shall govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and for all mankind. Prime Minister John Diefenbaker. I don't know if we'll get through all of what I've got here, but I think we're going to make some interesting connections. But as I was saying, I'm primarily an activist. Primarily, I started off getting active with the 9/11 issue. I didn't believe that from day one. And it took quite a while, but, just talking to friends in my own circle, stuff like that, questioning that and talking to people about it. But, there was just so much fear that around that people just didn't want to look at other so-called theories or facts about that issue. It took quite a while. And myself, I didn't really go public on it until about, I was busy on internet sites, websites, chat rooms, things like that for many years, very anonymously. But it took until about 2006 when I really started going public on that. And I happened to attend an event in Vancouver that featured Barry Swicker. And he's a Canadian media critic, and he was one of the first people that I learned about who was talking openly about what really happened on 9/11. So when he attended or spoke in Vancouver in 2006, I went to that event. I met a nice lady by the name of Roxanne. She's here today. And together with a number of other people, we formed the first 9/11 Truth Group in Canada in Vancouver. A year later, we put on a huge conference, very successful, and it kind of spawned the movement across Canada. So really proud of where that's gone. About a year and a half ago, I put on an event at the border, the Peace Arch border crossing. It was the Northwest Truth Convergence. And we had people from Washington State and all over BC come to that event. And our featured speaker on that day was none other than Splitting the Sky. And I'm very proud to have been the guy who introduced him to the 9/11 Truth community as well. He put on just a heck of a talk down there, really wowed the people. Steve was down there, filmed it for us, got it out for us. And so a lot of people saw that and was just blown away by this guy. So I've had the pleasure of working with him a lot in the last year and a half. We've traveled the country together, and we spoke together on Parliament Hill a year ago on September 11th. So it's quite an honor to work with him. And that's been the beauty of doing activism, is that I was once one person, one guy with an alternative view of things. And I've always been pretty open-minded, but, when you're alone and you're with other people and you think, geez, should I bring this up? Should I bring this up? Nah, don't bring it up. But now I've got a lot of activist friends. My whole life is activism. And it's nice to be dealing with people who, as far as I'm concerned, are dealing with the real world. And for that reason, so I really appreciate the fact that Raymond Geyser, around the time that I started getting active, put on his radio show on CHLY here, and I've been a regular guest on his show as well. I think I hold the record for guest appearances on your show. So yeah, it's been great working with you as well, Raymond. Met a lot of great people, a lot of great connections. Will Thomas, another gentleman, spoke at the Vancouver 9/11 conference, who you're really going to enjoy as well. Anyways, in the last year, I guess since about March, we all heard about the flu outbreak in Mexico, and a lot of different things happened there that set off were red flags for me as far as what we were hearing about that, and I kind of sensed that we were overdue for something for a long time. We'd certainly been being fear-mongered for the last 3-4 years about the bird flu and so on, and how that was going to get us. And then all of a sudden we had this strange outbreak in Mexico. So I kept watching that story very closely, and I listened a lot to the NutriMedical Report with Dr. Bill Deagle. I've been on his show as a guest several times. I call in there fairly often as well. I'm in close contact with him. I have been for about 4 or 5 years, I guess. Anyway, so he has quite a team of experts on his program that were dealing with this on a roundtable discussion every day, new information coming out. One of the persons he works with is a guy by the name of Alexander S. Jones, who is an NIH, National Institute for Health whistleblower. And so one of the things that he was coming out with was that when he got a hold of the data, started examining the gene structure of this virus in Mexico, he came to the conclusion this could not be anything other than a man-made virus. Okay, so anyways, I'm going to try and get into the main thing we're going to be talking about is false flag operations. I'm not going to get too much into detail about 9/11. We're going to touch on that somewhat. We're going to talk somewhat about the swine flu, somewhat a little bit about vaccines, but not going to go into a lot of great detail on that. We're not going to have time for it. Would governments or their agents cause their people harm intentionally or kill them? A lot of people want to put up that argument right away. Oh, governments would never do that. Unfortunately, that's not true. Just over the last century, far more people have been massacred by their own governments than in all the wars combined when you add up the numbers. What we see is we still see, we see wars raging around the world, and we've got the peace movement, but has the peace movement ever been successful? In my opinion, they haven't. We're gonna get into that. Let's see. Yeah, I'll back up here. Okay, false flag operations are generally covert operations conducted by governments or elements within governments, such agencies, which are designed to appear as if they are carried out by foreign entities, generally for the purpose of deceiving the public, changing attitudes, causing fear, and inciting them to a call to action, or to garner support for a war or other measures that they otherwise would likely not approve of or go along with. So they serve as a pretext or justification for extreme course of action. And often what we see coming out of that is the removal of rights and freedoms and liberties. Now, this can also be done within bureaucracies. We have all kinds of different agencies. We have police agencies, we have fire departments, but military, all these different things. They all have to justify themselves in some ways. And so a lot of pretexts are created just to justify themselves and justify increased spending and so on. False flag events are not limited to war, however. They have been used in peacetime too, including domestically, such as with the COINTELPRO operations, counterintel programs in the United States in the 60s and 70s, in which these groups and various political groups were infiltrated to disrupt, to divide, and to marginalize various groups with extremism. And I would argue that never really went away. They are alive and well in all Western nations today, working within all organizations of movements that pose a threat to the establishment, such as the anti-globalization movement, such as labor unions, native groups, environmental groups, the peace movement, and yes, the truth movement. Disinfo ops, they're out there. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but generally, people ask me about that all the time. You got new people coming into the truth movement all the time, and they kind of glom on to one person or the other person and kind of go with that and jump on a little bandwagon and go with it type of thing. And they kind of think, well, this person, they're in the truth movement, they must be telling me the truth. Well, 90% of the time, 80-90% of the time, they probably are. That's how they get their credibility, by telling you a lot of good information. The problem is in the solutions. That's where you need to look. Where is this person trying to steer me with the solutions that this person is proposing? It doesn't matter what the issue is. Okay, in my opinion, the reason that the peace movement has not been very successful and that wars rage on is because leaders do not encourage members to look at false flag operations, but rather are steered instead into controlled opposition groups and limited hangouts, where any notion that one's own political leaders, officials, or branches might be involved in a terror event or having prior knowledge in which they fail to act to save lives is quickly denounced as absurd and unpatriotic. Indeed, false flag events are the exception, are not the exception for starting wars and shaping public opinion, but rather the norm, according to Webster, Griffin, Tarpley, Barry Swicker, and many other non-mainstream historians. And as I see it, if you really want to have peace, you have to look at the real causes of war. No holds barred. Okay, don't leave anything uncovered. And as my friend Splitting the Sky, John Boncourt, will always tell you, follow the money. Okay. So, anyways, what we see though is that a lot of the leaders in these movements want to steer us into, the right left-wing debate, and that's all part of a PsyOp. That's all there to distract us from getting to the truth of events and keep us doing things that aren't going to work to achieve whatever our goal is. They get co-opted. Okay, so in the peace movement, for example, just a little example. I mean, we always hear about these big rallies and people marching around with their black t-shirts and their signs, stop the war, and we've been kind of conditioned into thinking that that's how you stop a war. And they did that, they do that deliberately because they want you to believe that that's what stopped the war in Vietnam in the 1960s or 1970s, when in fact it was the people on the ground in Vietnam, the soldiers turning their guns on their own commanders, that really stopped that war. Okay, but they'd rather you believe that marching around with a sign is going to stop something. Okay. Okay, well, there's political parties or organizations, religious groups, corporations, as well as global organizations will sometimes use false flag tactics and PsyOps to achieve their goals. Global warming, anyone? What have we heard about that in the last few years? Major PsyOp. And what's come out in the last week? A lot of documents that prove that that whole thing was a setup, right? That we were being lied to deliberately. Okay, so this can be done. This can be done to discredit or implicate rival groups with competing agendas to create the appearance of enemies or threats where none exist, or to create the illusion of organized and a directed threat. Events need not necessarily be totally planned. Okay, for example, insider trading within companies, where certain people are privy to certain key information. So they might see something coming, and they will start a panic sell-off and then buy up all the stocks at bargain basement price and basically take over a company. Now that of course can be planned, but it doesn't need to be. It can happen just through the course of events. But somebody has insider knowledge, and that's what this is all about. David Icke, I love David Icke. I don't agree with everything he says, but he explains things marvelously. David Icke is credited with coining the term problem, reaction, solution, which is used quite commonly today within the movement. It's derived from a process called the Hegelian dialectic of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Now, in this model, societies are moving toward are moving, are moved along toward a particular designed agenda by the most powerful ruling elites. Okay, and Ike states that you secretly create a problem and offer the ready-made solution when the people are screaming for something to be done. Now, I do disagree with that a little bit, because in my opinion, in my observations, it's not really the masses screaming. It's they're usually in shock and bewilderment, going, what the hell happened? It's usually the opposition parties and the media that are doing all the screaming and who are giving you the solution and demanding this action be taken, right? And we're still sitting there going, what's going on? But they're going to limit the debate about what the necessary action should be, right? And they're going to steer that agenda until they get it through. Okay, so most people who talk or write on this topic usually do so in a relatively modern context and is primarily USA centered. And I think that's because of 9/11 that's so fresh in our memories and the war and terror is still going on. But we can look over the last century, there's all kinds of examples, and the USA is the most common example that's used. But from my reading, it seems to be a practice which is present in all cultures and dates back to ancient times, when certain groups acquired particular knowledge, skills, or secrets that others did not have. And they could easily manipulate whole civilizations through deception. These became the so-called mystery schools, the secret societies. And they possessed occult, which means hidden, knowledge. And some refer to this also as the priest class. Now, don't confuse that with church, okay? That class refers to not just churches, but also can be attributed to so-called witch doctors, the shaman of tribes, certain tribes, who, for example, with intimate knowledge of the solar or lunar cycles, were able to bamboozle their people, knowing that an eclipse or something was going to take place. Okay, so they can manipulate the masses through fear and then wow them with a prediction that if you do this or do that, something is going to happen, okay? So this is really nothing new. And I think from this evolved the magician class, whose trade is the art of deception, as well as the what we can now call the intelligence agencies, whose role it became to spy on citizens and to report to the leaders, to the powerful people, as well as to commingle and gain intelligence for the rulers, to keep the masses under control through fear, by way of PsyOps and propaganda, as well as with mass distractions, such as television. And they seem to have merged over time. And what this is basically all about is mind control, mass mind control, okay? And I don't know if I can go into this or not, but there's, yeah, I'll leave that. Something I'm just going to urge anybody who's active and I heard a gentleman talking earlier about meetings and how these meetings that he's going to are controlled and so on. Just look up the term Delphi operations, Delphi mind control. Okay, once you understand Delphi, you can get your agenda through in these meetings. Okay, because you know how they operate. How they're basically moving people into consensus. Oh, and you can't think outside of the box. Well, we have to think outside of the box if we really want to get to the bottom of what's happening, and if we really want to change things in this world. So I'm just going to go into a number of examples of false flag operations from the last century. Again, this is not exclusive. This is not anti-American by any means, but these are some of the examples that come up. Okay, we had the sinking of the Maine in Havana Harbor, from which many reports was intentionally scuttled, though some still say it was an accident. In either case, it was blamed upon the Spanish, and the media, led by the Hearst Media Group, publicized as such to gain support for the American people for the war effort in the Spanish-American War. Then we had the sinking of the Lusitania in World War I. There's an excellent docudrama that you can download a lot of places on the internet about the sinking of the Lusitania, where it's now come out that it was deliberately provoked. She was known to have been illegally carrying munitions for the British, and then led into the pathway of the German U-boats. And to that point, the vast majority of Americans did not want to join in World War I. The news of that sinking changed everything. World War II, we had the Reichstag fire in Germany, Reichstag, I speak German by the way, believed now to have been set by Hitler's own people to blame on the communists. And it enabled him to basically set fire to the Constitution and remove rights and liberties with popular support. A number of others were carried out too during Hitler's reign. So on the other side of the world, the American people didn't want to join World War II either, or the war in Europe. It can now be shown that the U.S. government and the Brits manipulated the Japanese into attacking the USA at Pearl Harbor, primarily through an oil embargo. It has also come to light that the Americans had cracked the Japanese communication codes and knew well in advance that an imminent attack was going to take place. Okay, but they stood down and sacrificed their own people at Pearl Harbor to bring about a wave of indignation and outrage and the demand to join another war. In the early 60s, the Joint Chiefs of Staff actually approved a plan to carry out terrorist attacks in the United States, including staging of planes being blown up and the killing of U.S. citizens through bombings to blame it on Cuba as a justification to invade Cuba. That was called Project Northwoods, which was accidentally declassified and then discovered by James Bamford. JFK halted that plan and fired the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and that's no doubt one of the reasons why he was unfortunately assassinated and blamed on the proverbial lone gunman Lee Harvey Oswald. Then we had the USS Liberty, was an intelligence vessel of the U.S. Navy, monitored the Arab-Israeli war, and was attacked by Israeli fighter jets in the Mediterranean Sea. And many U.S. servicemen were killed and injured. President Johnson refused to send help as that attack was going on, and apparently wanting that boat to be sunk, and apparently did actually say, "I want that ship going to the goddamn bottom of the ocean." Okay, and they wanted to blame that on the Arabs, so that America would join in that war as well. Then we had the Gulf of Tonkin incident, Vietnam. Okay. President Johnson used that as a pretext for declaring the war on Vietnam, but he admitted later that there was no attack. What they were saying was that the Vietnamese Navy was attacking their ships with PT boats. They didn't have any PT boats, and there were pilots in that area who've also come out and said, U.S. Forces pilots that said, we saw no such thing take place. Okay. But, something like 58,000 Americans lost their lives and millions of Vietnamese, of course. So then we had Gulf War I. The U.S. had long been supporting Saddam when they had trained and put into power. He was basically a CIA operative, and they supplied him with WMDs, which he used against the Kurds and the Iranians, and turned a blind eye to his treatment of his own people. Then they set him up for a fall, encouraging him to attack Kuwait. They did this a little bit subtly because he was complaining that Kuwait was slant drilling into their oil wells, and so he had a talk with April Gillespie at that time, who was the ambassador, and the Americans said, "Well, we have no opinion on it." Well, of course, as soon as they attacked, then we had Gulf War I, right? When we had to have this grand coalition go in there and kick Saddam's butt. Just carrying on here, 1993, we had the World Trade Center bombing number 1. And in that case, it came out in court that one of the people involved in that case who had built the bomb, cooked the bomb, was actually working for the FBI, was trying to, had infiltrated this group, and he didn't even want to give them the real bomb, but the FBI told him, yes, we want a live bomb to be used, and of course that did get carried out. That bombing did take place, so he bailed at that point in time. But he was wearing a microphone, and he taped their conversations with the FBI, so it's quite well documented that they knew in advance, and they allowed it to happen. Then we had the Oklahoma City bombing. The Murrah building bears all the hallmarks of an inside job. Unexploded ordnance were found within those buildings at the time when they were the rescue teams were going in to rescue people from the buildings. They found unexploded bombs. There's many reports of that were on mainstream TV, gone the next day. Fortunately, people had the wherewithal, the savvy to put a tape in the machine and have saved some of these, and you can watch them on the internet now. So we know that that actually took place. Couldn't have happened just from that Ryder truck outside the building. Then, of course, we had 9/11. I'm going to come to that in a second. We had the WMD story with Iraq again, Gulf War II. Okay, I mean, how many people believe that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction today? I mean, we heard about it and heard about it. No, it's the we've got to go get Saddam. We've got to get those WMDs. It's going to be the next thing we see is going to be a nuclear cloud exploding. And of course there was no WMDs. Saddam had complied with everything, and they went in and did it anyways, and that war is still raging on. I'm going to go back to 9/11 now. Just some of the basic facts without getting into the nuts and bolts of what happened on that day, on September 11th, 2001. Okay, a lot of stuff happened before that, which brought this whole thing about. Okay, the CIA trained and funded the Mujahideen fighters to fight the Russians in Afghanistan. Okay, that was under Jimmy Carter. And that later morphed into what is now called Al-Qaeda, or CIA-da, I'd prefer to call them. U.S. oil interests had planned to put an oil pipeline through Afghanistan long before that invasion took place. Okay, and it's documented that the plans to invade Afghanistan were made at least 6 months prior to 9/11, and that Bush signed the order to invade a day before 9/11. Britain and the UK had already put military assets into place to be deployed before that war ever started. The protocols regarding scrambling fighter jets, which had existed for decades, were changed about 3 months leading up to 9/11, and then changed back to old protocols that had worked just fine the next day. Everything got changed back. So 3 months before 9/11, they changed it. All of a sudden, no planes could be scrambled. They had to go through a whole long, big bureaucracy to get those planes off the ground. If you ever get a chance, you can watch online Will Thomas's presentation from the Vancouver 9/11 Truth Conference, where he detailed that whole thing. It was just amazing information. And my friend Robin Horton, who I work with pretty closely, he's a former air traffic controller at Boston Center in the 80s, he actually helped write those protocols. So he knew within 5 minutes, something's wrong with this story. Right? Where are the fighter jets? Okay, then we had put option stocks being placed on American Airlines, United in the weeks preceding 9/11. Record numbers. And that was totally ignored by the 9/11 Commission because it didn't fit with the Bin Laden story, right? No. It's all Bin Laden, right? Whatever doesn't fit, push it aside, right? So, and somebody else who has followed that story, and actually a very detailed analysis of that is Splitting the Sky in his presentation that he gave in Victoria a year or so ago called Follow the Money, about a 2-hour presentation you can watch online as well. Now, here's something that has come up. Splitting the Sky, okay, amongst others, researched the money trail and found at the center of this racket the company AIG and 2 partner or subsidiary companies, Marsh & McLennan and Kroll & Associates. Now, I'm not going to go into their details just yet, but I would like you to remember those names. Okay, then the new leaseholder of the World Trade Center at the time, Larry Silverstein, he took out an insurance policy on those buildings that would potentially pay him $7 billion if the complex was destroyed by a terrorist attack. The buildings were known to be white elephants full of asbestos. Okay, that was known back in the 80s already that those buildings were going to be worthless at some point in time. They went and got estimates done to what it would cost to pull all that asbestos out of there, and the cost was just exorbitant. It would not have been worth it. So they wanted to. They talked about, even in the 80s, we're talking about how they would bring those buildings down. They could not get a permit to bring those buildings down, okay, without first removing the asbestos. So what do we do? And also the occupancy rate of those buildings was very poor. It was diminishing all the time because they were not high tech in terms of for computer systems and so on and so forth. For the networks that we have today, they weren't really up to scratch for that. So a lot would have had to have been invested into them. So they were a diminishing asset, basically becoming white elephants. In the days following 9/11, a number of alleged hijackers turned up alive. Okay, and that's according to some mainstream reports, and then some say as many as 9. Depends on where you look. Turned up alive. But even if just one turned up alive, this story of the 19 hijackers just, starts to, be suspect right at that point. You can't go with that. You have to start asking some questions right there. Okay, but if there's as many as 9, and it's also come out that a number of them were being trained at flight schools in the United States that were CIA operations. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about psychological operations. A lot of people confuse the two terms. They're not necessarily the same. They can be the same, but they're not necessarily the same in all cases, okay? Sometimes things really do happen by accident, as I said, or happen in nature, earthquakes and so on and so forth. And people, or governments or global organizations will just glom onto those to promote their agenda. PsyOps, or psychological operations, is a term used in the military and government intelligence networks to exploit human vulnerabilities in enemy governments, militaries, populations, to pursue national and battlefield objectives. And that's quoted from Washington Post. Stated more simply, PsyOps is a means of intentionally deceiving targeted individuals and populations through a variety of sophisticated methods for specified objectives, or specific objectives. In essence, it's mass mind control, mass manipulation, or perception of perception and of consciousness. It is the creation of bogeymen to create fear and compliance. Now that's something I can show you. Bogeyman is a legendary ghost-like monster. The bogeyman has no specific appearance, and conceptions of the monster can vary drastically, even from household to household within the same community. In many cases, he simply has no set appearance in the mind of a child, but is just an amorphous embodiment of terror. Bogeyman can be used metaphorically to what's the word here? Denounce a person or a thing of which someone has an irrational fear. And that's what these people are trying to instill into us, these irrational fears. Parents often say that if their child is naughty, the bogeyman will get them in an effort to make them behave. The bogeyman legend may originate in Scotland, where such creatures are sometimes called bogles, bogarts, or bogies. Bogeyman tales vary by region. In some places, the bogeyman is male, in others female, in others they're both. In some Midwestern states of the United States, the bogeyman scratches at the window. In the Pacific Northwest, he may manifest in green fog. I hadn't heard that one before. In other places, he hides under the bed of the closet, tickles children when they go to sleep at night. It is said that a wart can be transmitted to somebody by the bogeyman. Bogeyman might be said to be to target a specific mischief. For instance, a bogeyman that punishes children who suck their thumbs, or general misbehavior. Basically, this myth of the bogeyman goes back a long ways and is pervasive in all societies. Okay, and basically, we think of that in terms of children, but that's how the elite also see us, and they're also trying to instill in us these irrational fears all the time. There was a great documentary that came out back around 2004, 2005 called The Power of Nightmares. British documentary aired on BBC, never aired in the United States of America. They had it on CBC here at one time. You can watch it online on Google Video for free. 3 parts, 3 hours in total. Excellent video that documents how Al-Qaeda basically was made into this bogeyman that we have today, as well as the whole neocon cabal on the other side simultaneously. It shows us from two different perspectives leading up to this climax of 9/11. Now that's, in that video, he basically sort of takes the official story at face value, but it's an interesting contrast in how these things developed over many years, decades even. So now we're going to get into, or get back to where I started at the beginning with swine flu that developed in Mexico. Thing is about, and I'm calling this Swine-Eleven or the false flag flu, that virus, they're saying that had never been seen before, okay? Started in Mexico. Normally viruses start in Asia in the fall and winter months. This one was starting in the springtime in Mexico, and also happened to be breaking out very close to the laboratories of Baxter Pharmaceuticals. We know that in February of this year, Baxter had been caught putting live avian flu virus into vaccines that they were sending to, I think, 16 different countries in Europe. And that was discovered by accident when somebody actually did their job and did some testing before they used those, and injected into a bunch of ferrets, all of whom died. And I understand that it was in, I think it was in Poland as well. They paid street people to test these, to offer themselves as test subjects for these vaccines, and I think 25 of them died. Could have been Novartis. Could have been. Okay. So we know that 9/11 kicked off the so-called worldwide war on terror, and that a lot of people and companies profited handsomely from that and still do. The war is still ongoing. Fewer than 3,000 people were killed on 9/11, but at least 1 million people have died as a result of that campaign. Now, would you believe that the global pandemic planning has its roots in the events of 9/11? Have anybody heard the term? Anybody heard of the GHSI? Okay, that is the Global Health Security Initiative, and this is, I'm reading from their document here. Following September 11, 2001, former United States Secretary of Health Human Services Tommy Thompson suggested that countries fighting bioterrorism should meet to share information and coordinate their efforts to improve global health security. Global health security. On November 7th, 2001, Canada's Minister of Health at the time hosted the first ministerial meeting in Ottawa, Canada, to discuss global health security. Attending, in addition to Canada, were ministers from various different countries. We'll just leave it at that and move on. Ministers called for a concerted global action to strengthen public health preparedness and response to the threat of international biological and chemical radionuclear terrorism. They agreed to forge a partnership to address issues of protecting public health and security globally, and to work together in the following areas. To explore joint cooperation in procuring vaccines and antibiotics. To engage in constructive dialogue regarding the development of rapid testing, research, and variations of vaccines, and our respective regulatory frameworks for the development of vaccines, and in particular smallpox vaccines, to further support the World Health Organization's disease surveillance network, and whose efforts, that's the World Health Organization, to develop a coordinated strategy for disease outbreak containment. 4, to share emergency preparedness and response plans, including contact lists, and consider joint training and planning. To agree on a response to international collaboration on risk assessment and management. Risk assessment and management, listen to that word, I'll come back to that. And a common language to risk communication, to improve linkages among laboratories, including level 4 laboratories in those countries which have them, to undertake close cooperation on preparedness and response to radionuclear and chemical events, to share surveillance data, and the national public health laboratories and information on the real or threatened contamination of food and water supplies, along with information on risk mitigation strategies to ensure safe food supplies. The GHSI was, and I should state too, they probably justified this because of the so-called anthrax attacks, you recall, about 3 or 4 weeks after 9/11, okay? That's all been traced back to U.S. labs, Fort Detrick. Okay, that was a bioweapon of the American military. The GHSI was envisaged as an informal group to fill a gap for like-minded countries to address health issues of the day, such as global health security. The initiative was not intended to replace, overlap, or duplicate existing networks. Now, here's the kicker. In 2002, at their Mexico City ministerial meeting, ministers broadened the scope of the GHSI mandate to include the public health threat posed by pandemic influenza. Bin Laden's going to send us the bird flu. Look out! Okay, risk management. Again, it comes up here again. Current GSI working groups, networks, risk management and communications working group, pandemic influenza working group, chemical advanced preparedness, the global health security laboratory network, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here we're going to come to back to 2009. We talked about the H5N1 bird flu scare for the last 3 or 4 years. It seemed to me that they really wanted that to happen, didn't they? You know? I mean, look out, look out, look out. You know, we've got to get vaccines ready and all this kind of stuff, right? And we're going to have a pandemic and it's going to kill everybody. And it never happened. And then all of a sudden we had this one come out. So, a not so funny thing happened in February 2009. That was the thing in Europe, as I mentioned, those people getting vaccinated and dying. So a number of people, as I stated from the outset, including Alexander S. Jones, another fellow from Australia, name skips my mind at the moment, a brilliant scientist, also looked at the gene clades, decided that this had to have been a lab-created virus. This was... Okay, so anyways, what the funny thing about this was that they, another thing that caught my attention was the fact that they went to pandemic level 6 very quickly on June 11th, 2009, 6/11. Okay, and what that basically means is that all signatory countries, 194 countries are signatories of the international health regulations. Okay. And what that means basically is that they can be taken over by the WHO. The WHO can basically declare a national pandemic, or that country itself can declare a national pandemic emergency, and the WHO can basically take over your country. It's full sovereignty. Okay, well here's one thing. Thanks for bringing that up. Is that caught my attention too, was the fact that here we've got all this apparatus. It's been there since 2001 that they're planning for. What did they do in Mexico? Did they shut Mexico down? No. Did they stop flights and people from going in and out? No. Okay? All this talk about preparedness and so on, working for the WHO, they have a number of other different organizations in pandemic preparedness planning. And by the way, they did change the definition of what a pandemic is. Did you know that back in 2003? Okay, so that it no longer involves having mass casualties, okay? So there was really no reason to do this. The WHO has a number of different organizations that they're working with, including private firms. And lo and behold, I find the company Kroll and Associates and Marsh & McLuhan merged, Kroll and Marsh, doing pandemic preparedness for the WHO. What's their job? On 9/11, it's been found that they were the ones who were behind the put option stocks. It's been found through hard drives that came out of the World Trade Center debris. It's transferred to a company in Germany who downloaded the data from those hard disks and discovered where that money trail led to. Back to these guys here who are doing the put option stocks for AIG and all these other Wall Street bankers. Okay? Funny thing happened though. A company that was doing that investigation in Germany, they got bought out by Kroll and Marsh. Okay, so that was killed. That never went anywhere. Now, Dr. Juea splitting the sky, he might go into that more in his presentation. And I haven't had time to research this extensively, but it's interesting to note that this same firm comes up again in terms of pandemic preparedness. These guys are involved in so many different types of black operations, it's ridiculous. And what did we see in Mexico? What's supposed to happen didn't happen. Okay? In the World Trade Center, the security was basically removed. We had the fighter jets stood down, right? Essentially, we're stood down. Okay, so so that was allowed to carry through. Okay, now here we have these guys. What should have been their job? They should have been shutting down Mexico. They didn't. Okay, somebody's making a hell of a lot of money. These guys are involved big time in risk management. All right, this is from the Australian virologist Adrian Gibbs. According to Adrian Gibbs, and this is from a book he has just released. Now, he was talking about this very early on, within a few weeks, and people were really, he'd gotten onto a few different TV shows and so on, and they said, oh, well, the WHO looked at your evidence and they said there's nothing to it. Well, that's really easy to do. Did they examine the evidence? No. They spent about maybe a weekend looking at it. You know, a couple of guys, nah. Why? They don't have any interest in investigating these things if they're making money off of it, do they? Okay. Anyways, in his book that's just been released in Germany, it's not available yet in English, as I understand, but somebody did send this to me just yesterday, the day before. I translated a couple of paragraphs here. He's considered to be or Gibbs, who considered this to be a possible explanation of the new influenza, now published his findings in Virology Journal. By this, he renewed discussion about the origins of the pandemic virus. The new pandemic H1N1 2009 virus, which has been discovered in Mexico and the U.S. In April, may be the product of 3 strains from 3 different continents that swapped genes in a lab or vaccine manufacturing plant. Okay, the spread of swine flu, new influenza, has ignited a unique global process. Never before have been vaccines marketed so fast and with so little long-term clinical data on possible risks and side effects. Okay, only a few months after virologists identified the virus as H1N1, the Geneva-based World Health Organization declared pandemic status of this disease. This decision seems to be more than unusual for 2 reasons, he says. Firstly, that the emergence of a novel strain of a virus is not new. 2, on the other hand, the burgeoning swine flu in Mexico proved to be a relatively harmless version of the new influenza virus. However, the activism of the WHO had far-reaching consequences. Almost instantly, precisely, those antiviral agents moved into the focus of public health authorities, which had proved to be increasingly ineffective against conventional flu viruses. They don't work. Okay, before the swine flu started, the WHO helped intentionally or not, pharmaceutical manufacturers to be an unexpected comeback of their antiviral old guard Tamiflu, as well as vaccines. Okay, lab-created virus. This is something by Dr. H. Ott, a gentleman who I follow his research a lot. I think he's a brilliant researcher. He doesn't get everything right, nobody does, but he explains it this way. All modern pandemics are caused by vaccine needles. As this author has repeatedly declared during many public radio interviews, the deadly 1918 influenza pandemic was the direct result of live virus-contaminated typhus fever vaccines mandatorily given to the U.S. and Allied military personnel during World War I. During that era, viruses were not even discovered yet, but they were doing vaccines even back in the 1800s, by the way. And what he says is during that era, the viruses were not discovered yet, and diseases were thought to be bacterial only. These deadly typhus fever vaccines were manufactured by John D. Rockefeller's research labs and Chinese pharma factories. The vaccine seed stock consisted of viruses harvested from human typhoid fever patients, cross-injected into swine herds to create increased seed stock, and then injected into chicken and turkey eggs for further incubation of the pathogens. This final harvested vaccine material then was injected into hundreds of millions of human veins. The result was a massive pandemic that claimed the lives of up to 50 million people. In 1918, the viral pandemic was an honest mistake, the result of a combination of very bad vaccine and gross ignorance about viruses and disease they caused. However, the continued denial of these facts and the subsequent reverse engineering of the killer virus in Fort Detrick labs that's a name you should look up, is inexcusable and constitutes a veritable crime against humanity. I agree. Moreover, the only way a modern swine flu pandemic can actually materialize is by injection of certain live viruses via vaccine needles. Make no mistake, the world is not experiencing a true pandemic explosion at the time, but it most assuredly will when and if the planned mass influenza vaccinations are completed worldwide. Okay, so who benefits from this? World Health Organization declaring the pandemic. They announced immediately they want to start making vaccines. How long does it take to make a vaccine? Anybody know? Information I've seen says about 9 months. Anyways, they're creating these problems and then offering the solution again. This is false flag operations. This is classic. Okay, and the thing is that, and then they're changing the rules again. As I said, they changed the entire definition of pandemic. In 2005, they created these international health regulations, or at least they updated them at that time to make sure that at that point in time, they were worried because of the SARS thing happened in 2004. It turned out to be basically nothing. That's when they rewrote everything, and basically said that the WHO basically can now take over countries. Okay, and so we could have a declaration. Obama. Already announced on Friday the 13th last month a national emergency on the basis of the flu in the United States. That could happen here in Canada. I would expect that it will happen, in fact, because only a couple weeks before that there was a very secretive meeting I happened to discover taking place in Mexico City between the health ministries of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. It's Department of Homeland Security and other such agencies, okay? They never published this anywhere in any North American journal, but I got a press release that ended up coming to me through India, okay, talking about this meeting. 2 weeks later, we have national emergency declared in the United States. Don't doubt that this couldn't happen and that they will say mandatory vaccinations for everybody, okay? It's not mandatory now. You got your rights, you got your freedoms, but we could have medical martial law, essentially, okay?
That's why they want a world government.
That is why they want a world government, okay? And there's all kinds of places we could go with this, but I'm gonna be wrapping it up here. I think we're just about there, eh, Raymond? Okay. Well, the one thing I just want to just state briefly is that people really need to get informed about vaccines and what is in these vaccines. The list of the ingredients that's in them is just horrendous. Somewhere I had a little list here. But we see things like thimerosal, mercury. They tell us, oh, it's harmless, it's nothing. We've got formaldehyde, we've got detergents, we've got antifreeze, we've got in some cases live virus in these things. We put on an event in Vancouver 3 weeks ago now with Dr. Chris Shaw from the University of British Columbia, a neuroscientist who went through the whole list of ingredients of our Panrix, I call it the Pandamatrix vaccine, here in Canada, and shows that they did not do adequate studying on these vaccines. Okay, even if you just leave aside whether or not a vaccine is going to work, just go through the ingredients and what the long-term implications are of those. I also have another website. It's CanadiansForHealthFreedom.org. Okay, and I'm working closely with Dee Nicholson in Toronto, with Roxanne here, and a number of other people, and we're right on top of this issue. So we've got a lot of most up-to-date information there, as well as at falseflagflu.com with regard to the vaccines. And as far as the origins of the H1N1 are concerned, here's a website. You might want to jot this down: labvirus.com. Okay, it's a friend of mine, Alex Studer. He's in San Francisco, and he's basically blogging for Dr. Bill Deagle, for Alexander S. Jones, Dr. H. Huot, and a number of other people, Eisenstein, whole list of people that are on that team. Okay, and on there you'll find the articles that, along with diagrams, graphics of the gene clatures and so on, where he gives his analysis of that. Okay, awesome website, and I do listen to that show, NutriMedical Report, on Genesis Communications Radio Network every day from noon till 3 p.m. It's hosted by Dr. Bill Deagle. A lot of fascinating guests on there. You may not agree with everything the man has to say, but I'm going to tell you, I've known him for years. The man is a genius, okay? And he was an insider who has come out with a lot of information that people don't want him to talk about. But he'll tell you about it anyways, believe it or not. But he's got a lot of facts. Very brilliant guy. Yeah, if you go on falsifiedflu.com, I have a section in there called the Pandemic Profiteers. And every week I'm just finding more and more news article reports posted that I post there about the profits. It's just billions and billions and billions of dollars being reaped by this. I think that's something I should mention too, is that on the days before they rolled out the vaccine here in Canada, of course the opposition parties were screaming for it, the media was screaming for it, there could be no other solution but the vaccine, we gotta have the vaccine, get it out there. So I predicted actually 3 days before that they put it out that they were going to do that, because they were creating the situation where she would have no choice but to release it. All the pressure was there, had to do it, right? The adequate safety testing was never done. At the time that they released the vaccine, the grand total of people who had died in Canada was 80 people up to that point. Since the vaccine was released, over 200. The same phenomena in the United States. They released their vaccine 3 weeks before we did. Everybody out here was all upset. All the papers were upset. The vaccine is already in the United States. Why don't we have it yet, you know? And the same thing happened. Within 3 weeks, the number of deaths in the United States being attributed officially to H1N1 more than doubled. 3 weeks later, roll out our vaccine, another 3 weeks, our death toll for H1N1 more than doubles, okay? So we got, as Roxanne was saying, right at the top of the page on CanadiansForHealthFreedom.org, there's a permalink there. Go through, read the reports that people are reporting to us every day. They're pouring in now, the adverse reactions. The government of Canada is telling us that there's been 36 relatively mild reactions to the vaccine and maybe one person died. Well, I found a report last week, it was on Euronews. It said 200 people died, okay? They said 36 adverse reactions. Said that, what was it again? Okay, well, there was one boy whose face ballooned up, yes, right? And then it said 200 died.
And 200 others died.
200 others died, right? I'm thinking, what the heck is going on here?
The next day, the article was removed.
Right, so they removed it. I saved a copy of that from the cache on Google, okay, and I've still got it posted up on my site. Take a look at it. Now that's interesting because we actually contacted Euronews to find out what is your source of this, where did this come from? It could not have been a typo. The way that they formulated it could not have been a typo. The next day after we brought it to their attention, they did not retract it. They did not say, oh, we were wrong about this or that and change the numbers or anything. They just removed that entire paragraph from the article. 2 days later, they changed the title on the article again. And then it just put a little thing in there saying, oh, contained some errors. There was a video on that article too. It's gone. It's history. Absolutely, yeah. No, and this is one thing we have to say is that this was never on the agenda of the Health Ministry of Canada or PHAC. They never said there was any other alternative, okay, other than vaccines, okay? There's all kinds of ways to build up your natural immune system, and that's what people should be doing. Well, the main thing is that we have to inform ourselves and inform others, and that's why I've been very active on this issue, outspoken on this issue. I want people to get this information. I've got this 3 DVD set. I'm asking for $5 each or 3 for $10. And I've also got another one there. I'm going to have to get those, put them into some sleeves. You can also get them from me through the website. Okay, just contact me, give me your address, and send me $10, $15 or whatever. Okay, I'll send them to you as well. All right, thank you very much.